Quick survey. How many of you read the news somewhat regularly? Let's say once a week. That's so much. What? Okay. More than expected. Good on you. How many of you scroll through Facebook or Snapchat and then pretend you read the news? It's more like it. I've been wondering recently, why do you do it? Why do you read the news? It's lots of big words, lots of big numbers. They throw shame at you. It takes a long time. Like, why? You could be doing other stuff. And I came to this conclusion. We read the news because we're all activists. We all care about something. Beyond ourselves, beyond our community, we care. We care about animals or the environment. We care about Puerto Rico or Las Vegas. Maybe we just want to know what it's like to live a life outside of Shanghai, breaking out of our bubble. That connection is important to us, being able to understand something beyond us. And so when it's broken, we rightfully get upset. That's what we saw when fake news rose last year and this year. We got mad because fake news distorts our perception of the world. It breaks that understanding and it breaks our ability to step outside of the bubble. But what if I told you there was one very pernicious lie that news has and we've been overlooking for so long? That lie is emotional untruthfulness. But let's back up. What is truth? There are actually two kinds. The first is factual truth. These are things that are objective, that you can verify. Often you can put a number or a yes, no to them. So it'd be a thing like, I did my homework last night. No. Donald Trump had more people at his inauguration than Barack Obama. Probably not. I prepared enough for this speech. Certainly not. These types of things are actually verifiable, and they're things that you would consider a fact. But that's not all there is to truth. Truth and news itself is about informing you, your understanding and what goes on in here. And what goes on in here isn't just rational. It's not just analytical or numerical. It matters a lot about what you care about, what's close to you. We prioritize and dedicate our times and lives and minds to the things that we empathize the most with. So when news tells the lie of not giving emotional truthfulness, blocking out what we understand and what we can connect to and turning them into cold, hard things like numbers and graphs, that's a lie as well. How has this happened? There are two main trends that have caused the rise of euphemism and numbers over the rise of people within the news. The first is oversimplification. Now, we have news fatigue in the 21st century. Simply put, too much is going into our heads at once, including our math homework, including what people are telling us, including the internet. There's simply so much going on that you don't have as much time or effort to care about the news. You have less time, less effort to dedicate to each individual article, each individual piece of information, and as a result, news has become shorter. What doesn't fit into a paragraph is omitted. 5-minute fixes are now becoming on the rise. According to UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism, concision is key, and if you cannot achieve that, your journalism will fall. But what that means then is that you cut out the longer things, the less important things, so-called. You cut out names because they're shorter than numbers. You cut out stories because they're shorter than quotes. You cut out people because ultimately that backstory is not relevant to gaining that little bit of information. If you want to fit in 140 characters, you cut that all out. The second trend that's occurring is sensationalization. What's important to us? 60% of our news comes from social media nowadays. That means that CNN and Fox News and the New York Times have to compete with Snapchat and Facebook to gain your attention. They're essentially becoming a form of entertainment. But what that means is, according to Liz Heron, they have to do something flashy. They have to include an infographic, some big numbers, a quote. What this usually means is a focus on causes rather than effects, institutions rather than humans. So it'll be a Donald Trump quote, or what's happening in Congress, or what's happening at the heads of companies, rather than what's happening to people. But I'd be hypocritical if I stood here and talked gibberish about this stuff and I never told you what that means in the real world. Let me give you an example of this happening. Say you were to read an article tonight. You went on the New York Times or your Facebook feed and you saw something about the Philippines and you remember it's a country in Asia somewhere. It's going to refresh you on a few things. The president right now, Rodrigo Duterte, is enforcing a war on drugs. He is supporting police officers in so-called death squads and vigilante groups who go out and target civilians who are suspected of using or selling drugs. Furthermore, 7,000 or 4,000 people have died depending on who you ask. And finally, the Human Rights Commission has had its budget cut to just $20 for the year of 2017. It's bad, right? Like it's pretty bad, I think. 4,000, 7,000, sounds bad. Drugs, sounds bad. Philippines, I don't know. These things are like arguably bad, but they're like arguably bad. They're not something that you would remember in 5 minutes because you have bigger things to think about, like what you're having for dinner or your math grade, which is infinitely more traumatizing to you. They're not close to you because ultimately that number is, again, just a number. But what do you miss out on when you read that in 20 seconds and move on with the rest of your life? Just a warning, if you don't like graphic imagery, you might want to avert your eyes. You miss out on packing tape, which is the tool that Filipino police officers use to wrap around victims' heads and throw them into the streets to suffocate, dying in front of their peers. You leave out how death comes knocking for people like Crisostomo Diaz, who opened the door to 3 armed men who shot him in the face, despite the fact that he turned himself in 1 month before for using. You leave out how his widow doesn't know what she's going to do anymore, how she's going to feed her children, and she has to worry about that in her moment of agony. You miss out on 13-year-old Roel Scott, 13 years old, the age when we started caring about boys and girls and what they thought about us and our grades. And he's worrying now about whether the police are going to abduct him because his uncle used drugs. You miss out on Maria Deparin, who sent her sons off to work every single day, anxious and praying that they would come back. And 1 week, they both stopped coming back, found dead under a bridge. These people have lives. They have stories. They have names. They're real, just like us, and they deserve to be remembered and memorialized. The Philippines has become a place with mass incarceration, mass violence, senseless deaths. It's a place where fathers bury their sons in graves meant for them. Unimaginably terrible, much, much worse than 4,000 to 7,000. Yet we still allow it to be hidden behind that veil of words, because a quote by Duterte is much shorter, because 4,000 or 7,000 takes less space than a name. And the Philippines isn't the only story that this happened to. You can look back again. The Philippines is just one of many. Anywhere in the world where anything affects anyone, where there are human lives being impacted, there's a number representing it. And anywhere that that number exists, there's a human behind it, screaming to be heard, screaming to be remembered. We should care about these people, because if we don't, nobody will. It's said that 1 life is a tragedy and 1 million deaths is a statistic. So we should start caring about these people as we would our own, because they matter, their stories matter, and their lives matter. So what can we do about the news media that's completely ignorant of these people? 2 main things. The first thing is to change our own attitude towards the news. The thing is, when you see these types of editorials, when you see a quick infographic, when you see something that takes 2 minutes to read, you'd usually just skip past it. You'd usually go back to Facebook. You'd usually go back to your email. But if you're interested, I dare you. I dare you to go research it. I dare you to go read more. The photos that I used all came from this source by the New York Times. Pulitzer Prize winning. You can find it with a Google search. There are also alternate sources, like Atlantic, or Medium, or News Deeply. Investigative journalism that's dedicated to remembering people and their lives and giving you the true story, rather than just the numbers. But more importantly, we need to change how we think about news and how we address news ourselves. You see, the only reason that news is more about numbers right now than it is about people is because we allow it to be. We're the generation that wants the 5-minute fixes. We're the generation that wants infographics. We're the generation that wants numbers. We're the generation that wants quotes. And we can't be that generation, because we're the generation not of euphemism, but of life. We need to care. So commit to reading. Commit to caring. Commit to living these people's lives and being connected, because that's who you are, an activist. I want a world where the news media, and indeed us as well, care more about humans than we do about numbers. I hope you do too. Thank you.